From the very first time Spencer Dutton laid eyes on Alexandra in 1923, there was something electric in the air. Their relationship moved fast, too fast, some would argue. A whirlwind romance that felt both magical and doomed. But here's what makes it even more captivating. The intense chemistry we saw on screen wasn't just great acting. According to cast members and crew interviews, Brandon and Julia's connection was noticeable even when the cameras weren't rolling. It all started during rehearsals. At first, no one thought much of it. Both actors were committed to their roles, both incredibly talented, and both fully aware that their characters would go through a journey filled with danger, heartbreak, and passion. But as the production went on, especially during the long, grueling shoots in Africa and Europe, the bond between them started to grow, not just as colleagues, but as people who deeply respected and supported each other. Sources close to the set began whispering about how in sync they were. They weren't just learning their lines, they were finishing each other's thoughts. Brandon once said in an interview that working with Julia was like walking into a scene already halfway there, because her energy made everything feel real. Julia echoed the sentiment, saying Brandon brought a calm strength that made her feel safe, no matter how intense or emotional the scene was. The crew noticed too. Directors would call cut, and instead of immediately breaking character, the two would stay close, still whispering, still holding each other's hands. At first, people chalked it up to method acting, but eventually it became clear this was more than just performance. Something was happening between Spencer and Alexandra that was bleeding into real life, and that's where things started getting interesting. Because while their characters were falling in love on screen, Brandon and Julia were learning what it meant to trust someone in the chaos of a production that demanded everything from them, physically and emotionally. Every wave-crashed boat ride, every tear-streaked argument, and every stolen moment of peace between their characters was echoed in how much they leaned on each other behind the scenes. It was especially noticeable during season 2, where the emotional stakes were raised even higher. With Alexandra facing the consequences of her decisions and Spencer on the verge of losing everything, the performances demanded a level of vulnerability that only comes when two people are truly connected. And that's exactly what they were becoming. Friends close to the actors later shared that their relationship off-screen grew quietly, but deeply. It wasn't a showmance for headlines. It was something more personal, more protected. They didn't flaunt it, didn't post selfies or tease fans with cryptic Instagram stories. Instead, they let their characters speak for them. And maybe that's why fans could feel it so deeply, because the love wasn't being forced. It was honest. Even interviews during press tours became moments of curiosity. Watch closely, and you'll notice the way Brandon glances at Julia when she talks, or how she gently laughs at things he says, even when they aren't meant to be funny. There's a warmth between them that doesn't fade, even when they're surrounded by cameras and flashing lights. And fans noticed. Social media lit up with comments asking, "Are they actually together? Is this real? Please tell me Spencer and Alexandra are dating in real life." As the season progressed, their off-screen dynamic only deepened. According to crew members, the pair often requested time to rehearse privately, to connect emotionally before difficult scenes. No one questioned it. After all, the results were undeniable. Their performances in 1923 Season 2 were praised as some of the most emotionally raw moments in the entire Yellowstone universe. And now we know why. Because Brandon and Julia weren't just acting. They were living a love story that echoed the one they were portraying. But that wasn't the only twist this behind-the-scenes romance had in store. Because as the emotional storm of 1923 Season 2 reached its peak, Brandon and Julia had to face a reality that was even more challenging than what Spencer and Alexandra were dealing with on screen. In the next section, we dive into how this hidden relationship weathered the pressures of fame, filming, and the heartbreaking storylines that nearly tore them and their characters apart. As Season 2 of 1923 kicked into high gear, the story of Spencer and Alexandra grew darker and more complex. Their journey, once filled with wonder and adventure, began twisting into a series of trials, tragedy, miscommunication, and long separations that pushed their love to the edge. But what fans didn't realize was that these same pressures were echoing off-screen, where Brandon and Julia were also navigating a growing emotional bond under incredibly intense circumstances. Filming for 1923 wasn't your typical Hollywood setup. The production spanned continents, shooting in wild, remote locations that were often unpredictable. From the blistering African deserts to the moody coasts of Europe, each shoot demanded physical endurance and emotional intensity. Days were long. Conditions were harsh. There were moments where cast and crew had no choice but to power through rainstorms, broken equipment, and tight deadlines. But somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, Brandon and Julia found something solid: each other. According to people close to the production, they became each other's anchor. When Julia struggled with the emotional weight of portraying a woman so deeply in love but constantly in danger, Brandon was there to steady her. When Brandon had to channel Spencer's pain, his internal battles and losses, Julia grounded him. They weren't just scene partners, they were becoming each other's emotional support system. One story from the set stands out. During a particularly demanding shoot in the mountains, where they were filming a heartbreaking moment between Spencer and Alexandra, Julia reportedly broke down after the scene wrapped. It wasn't in the script, and it wasn't planned, but the emotion of the moment overwhelmed her. Brandon didn't leave her side. The two sat on a rock for nearly an hour, away from the cameras, just sitting in silence. No words, just presence. A crew member quietly said later, "That wasn't Alex and Spencer. That was Brandon and Julia." And in that moment, I think they realized what they meant to each other. But love, especially one growing under a spotlight, isn't without its challenges. Rumors started to circulate. Some speculated that the emotional intensity between them might spill into personal complications. Others whispered that perhaps this was just a set romance, something born from close proximity and the passionate demands of the show. But those closest to them pushed back on that idea. According to insiders, what Brandon and Julia shared was rooted in respect and shared experience, not a fleeting crush. In interviews, both actors spoke about how the roles pushed them to places they'd never been before. Brandon revealed that playing Spencer felt like stepping into a haunted space, a man driven by love but constantly facing loss. And Julia, knowing Alexandra's fate from the start, had to carry the weight of inevitable tragedy from the very beginning. She said in one interview, "It's hard to play someone who you know is going to die. You have to make every moment matter." And maybe that's what brought them so close. They weren't just playing lovers. They were sharing grief, hope, passion, and fear, all while knowing the story wouldn't end happily. Behind the scenes, that awareness hung heavy in the air. Especially as they neared the finale episodes, the emotional intensity became almost unbearable. Julia admitted she sometimes had to step away between takes just to breathe. And Brandon? He confessed he stopped reading the final scripts until the last possible moment, because the scenes were too painful to prepare for emotionally. That's not acting. That's living the heartbreak with your whole heart. And for them, it was deeply personal. Yet, amidst all that, they held on to each other. Sources say the bond between them actually grew stronger during those final episodes. When their characters were separated for long stretches, when Spencer searched for Alexandra, desperate and hopeless, Brandon was also feeling that emptiness off screen. It wasn't just performance. He missed his co-star, his partner. And when they finally reunited on screen for that emotional final dance in the afterlife, the emotions you saw weren't just from the script. They were real. Julia called that final scene bittersweet. She said it felt like saying goodbye to more than just a character. It felt like closing a chapter of something sacred. Brandon described it as an out-of-body experience. He said it didn't feel like he was acting anymore. It felt like something was ending, something that had changed him forever. Their performances in those final moments were heartbreaking, but it was because they were broken too. Saying goodbye to Spencer and Alexandra meant saying goodbye to a part of themselves. And maybe that's what makes their story so powerful, because unlike most TV romances, this one didn't fade when the cameras stopped rolling. It lingered in glances, in unspoken words, in shared silence. But what happened after the cameras stopped completely? After season 2 wrapped and Brandon and Julia walked off set for the last time, did their bond survive beyond 1923? Or did the emotional storm of the show leave too much damage behind? In the next section, we uncover what happened after filming ended, the rumors, the real confessions, and the moment fans started to realize the truth about what was really going on between Brandon and Julia. When 1923 season 2 wrapped and the final emotional scenes were locked into the show's timeline forever, something unexpected happened. The fandom didn't just mourn the loss of Alexandra or cheer for Spencer's strength. Instead, a new wave of curiosity took over. Viewers weren't just invested in the on-screen drama anymore. They wanted to know what was going on off-screen. What was happening between Brandon Sklenar and Julia Schlaepfer now that Spencer and Alexandra's story had ended? Almost overnight, rumors started flying. Paparazzi spotted Brandon and Julia attending events together. Private dinners, press junkets, award shows. At first, people assumed it was simply for promotion. After all, they had a show to sell. But then fans noticed something different. The way they looked at each other wasn't just professional. There was warmth, familiarity, and something deeply personal. In one interview, a journalist casually mentioned how well they seemed to understand each other. Julia laughed and said, "Well, we've been through a lot together." Brandon smiled, nodded, and added, "You don't go through a story like Spencer and Alex's and come out untouched." Neither denied anything, but they didn't need to. The connection was obvious. Still, the question lingered. Was it real, or just the remnants of characters they had poured their souls into? Sources close to the cast say it was more than just lingering emotions. One insider, who worked closely with the actors during both seasons, revealed that Brandon and Julia kept in touch constantly after filming wrapped. They would text, call, and sometimes just sit on Zoom without talking, just being in each other's company. And when they finally met up after the final wrap party, there was a moment of silence between them. No scripts, no cameras. Just two people who had lived through the same emotional storm. And that silence said more than words ever could. The rumor mill exploded when the pair were seen vacationing together in a small coastal town. No press, no PR teams, just them. Fans caught glimpses of them walking by the beach, laughing over coffee, and, yes, holding hands. Suddenly, social media was on fire. Brandia started trending, a mix of Brandon and Julia's names. Fan edits flooded TikTok and Instagram. Spalex is real. people commented, believing that Spencer and Alexandra's love had jumped into reality. But while fans were celebrating this possible real-life romance, Brandon and Julia remained quiet. That silence didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it only made the public more curious. Why were they so careful? Was there something they were protecting? Or were they just being cautious, letting the bond between them grow without the pressure of millions watching? The truth is, after living through the emotional extremes of 1923, they both needed space to process. Julia mentioned in a podcast interview that she spent weeks after filming just decompressing. "I had to remind myself who I was without Alexandra," she said. "It was harder than I thought." Brandon echoed that sentiment in another interview. "Spencer changed me," he said, "but so did the experience of working with Julia. We went through something that few people understand. That stays with you." For a while, both of them retreated from the spotlight. Julia went home to spend time with family. Brandon took a short trip alone, but they didn't stay apart for long, not because of obligations, but because they genuinely missed each other. One of the crew members from season 2 shared a story that painted a clear picture of their bond. During a behind-the-scenes shoot, Julia had forgotten her lines and was visibly stressed. Instead of the director stepping in, Brandon quietly walked over, took her hand, and whispered the first line of the scene to her. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't scripted. It was just him being there for her. And when the scene rolled again, Julia nailed it. No retakes, just pure connection. Moments like that don't fade easily. Later, when asked directly in an interview whether their on-screen romance had turned real, Julia simply smiled and said, "We shared something beautiful." Brandon, sitting beside her, nodded and added, "Whatever it was, it meant something." It was one of the first times they didn't deflect the question. They didn't need to confirm anything. The way they looked at each other said it all. And for fans, that was enough. Because the truth is, real love, especially one formed under pressure, grief, and passion, isn't always loud. Sometimes it grows quietly, away from the cameras, far from the noise. It's not about grand gestures or public declarations. It's about trust, shared memories, and the kind of bond that only two people who've walked through fire together can understand. Now, as the Yellowstone universe expands and rumors of spin-offs and prequels swirl, fans are hoping they'll see Brandon and Julia together again on screen.